Everyone. So I saw one or two people jump at that moment. Right, welcome to this meeting of the Integrated Care Partnership. Just go through a few key points in terms, firstly, of welcomes, and in one or two cases, or certainly one case, a farewell as well. So firstly, we have, since we last met, we've had the local elections and therefore a change of a new administration in Medway. We will have we've been informed of three new appointments to the committee, which is Councillor Vince Maple, the leader of Medway, who will succeed Alan Jarrett, Councillor Theresa Murray, the deputy leader of the council, succeeding David Brake, and Councillor Adam Price, who is the portfolio holder for Children's Services, succeeding Josie Isles. And we have apologies from both Vince and Adam for reasons which couldn't be avoided, but delighted to welcome Theresa to your first meeting of the Integrated Care Partnership. Similarly, just to welcome the Chief Constable, Tim Smith. We agreed at a previous meeting that, and indeed I think we all had to take through our governance, that it was important that police played the role that they do in this partnership. And I'm absolutely delighted that the Chief Constable's giving his time. Well, we had from Tracy Harmon, I think, a very helpful presentation and contribution last time, but nonetheless it's excellent to have the Chief with us, so welcome to you as well. And finally, just to note that in terms of farewells, Neil Davis, where's Neil? I've lost where Neil is. Yeah, right, there's Neil, right, yes. So this is Neil's last meeting of this partnership before he departs as Chief Executive of Medway. Clearly we have Richard with us who will be succeeding Neil, but I think on behalf of the partnership as a whole to say thank you for all that you have done in your work. Actually, I would say personally, actually also with partnership with KCC, but I think with the wider community and stakeholders represented here. And I know it's been a long and very, very distinguished service to Medway Council. So thank you. Right, no, and thank you as I also for your contribution to this this partnership. I did note, actually, it then says, my notes here say, it would be helpful to emphasise the accurate use of the microphones and speak into the mic, which I think I just failed quite to do. But in terms of apologies, I've mentioned the two Medway colleagues. I think, now who else was I told a moment ago? We have one or two others, I think. Who else can't? Oh, yes, sorry.
Yes, sorry. From Health Watch?
Yeah, Robbie from Health Watch is not able to join us. And was there anyone else? I think. Sati has also, I know, is unable to join us. Sati Lal. But we are, I understand, nonetheless quorate. That's correct, isn't it, Ilvara-san? That we have clearly we have to have the right representatives from all the different partners on here, but we do have that. So, okay. Moving on. Yeah, the quorum, we've got declaration of interests. Are there any interests to be that members of the partnership need to declare at this point in items on the agenda? Nothing? No? Sorry?
It's Jackie.
Oh, Jackie, hi.
The ether. I just need to add that I'm now chair of Dartford Immigration Trust. I checked the list. It isn't on there yet, which I wouldn't expect it to be. So just for general awareness, if it could be added to the list, thanks.
Thank you. We work hard to keep up with the various responsibilities you've taken on. So thank you. Any other points to note at this stage? No? Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Jackie. Right. The action log, I think we just had one action which is recommended to close, which relates to taking forward it's the next symposium, I think, if I remember rightly. Is that agreed? Yep. Vincent, you're going to come in.
Thank you, Chair. So, yes, that's being taken forward. We are working towards a date which would be potentially in October of 2023, and we'll provide more information to a future meeting.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything, Sedi? No, I haven't, actually. Well spotted. Thank you. Yes, so do we have, can we approve the minutes of the previous meeting? Is that agreed? Thank you. So, yeah, sorry, I'd taken the action log before I took the minutes. Apologies. Right, we move on then and we're almost back on schedule for the ICP development session that we had on the 14th of April. I think lots of the people around this table were present, and I think we all came out of it feeling that it had been a very positive and constructive session and very well worth doing. It was also there's I think quite a comprehensive paper from Jenny Dixon-Sherrard here setting out what came out of that. So I think just to begin with, Sedi, did you want to throw in any comments from your side as to particular things to highlight? I will add in a couple of comments of my own in a moment as to what we clearly will take the paper as being read, but just any particular reflections from the day from your side.
Thank you, Roger, and good afternoon, colleagues. Really, to echo Roger's introductory remarks, it was, from our perspective, on behalf of the ICB, a very positive opportunity to engage with the wider partnership that's so crucial for us to work together to deliver our shared objectives. You will see that during the course of the afternoon, those of you who are there, this will be a reminder, but for those of you who weren't, I hope it's a really helpful prompt as to the agenda that we need to work through between now and the next ICP meeting, because there's so many positive actions that we need to sit down and start to really work up and prioritize and resource as and when appropriate in order to make sure that as an ICP, we're laser focused on our agenda, we understand our reach and our influence, and to be perfectly frank with you, people come here understanding why they're here. And I think one of the prompts that led to the day that we had was a general view that having had a number of meetings, we still were not quite sure why we were here and what we're trying to achieve. This is the first step to achieving the clarity that we all need. If it's any consolation, I speak to ICB chairs on a daily basis pretty much, and every one of the 42 integrated care boards and integrated care partnerships are having these conversations pretty much at this time. So we're not alone in setting out the path that we want to follow. Just by way of absolute transparency and in the spirit of ensuring that we're all on this journey together, within the Integrated Care Board, we've established a time-limited task and finish group. Actually, forgive me, tasks and finish groups are supposed to be time-limited. I do apologise. To talk in much more detail about the Integrated Care Board's place within the integrated care system and working with the integrated care partnership. So coming out of our afternoon together, much of the work that has been set forward is now being discussed within the ICB. So this was not a wasted afternoon of our time. This is a live conversation, and we look forward to coming back to the next meeting with a really clear action plan in terms of work that we have to do and who's been asked or tasked with leading that work. So that's all to add, if I may, Roger.
Thank you very much, Sedi. And if I could just add a couple of comments of my own. I think there were two forms of value, I think, in the day. One was simply the fact that we got together, because I think a lot of us come here, meet, don't necessarily spend that much time, and actually there was a chance then for people to have those informal conversations on the side of the meeting, as well as what took place in the more open session, and I think that was extremely important. The second was there were actually, I think, some concrete proposals, a whole number of them, and I was just looking at, for instance, section 2.5, I think sets out quite a bit of that, and also I think right at the end, if I can find it, for my mind, section 5.7 talks there about some of the potential next steps, and I think that not to beat up on ourselves too much. We are all of us, as you said, across the country trying to find our way on this, and the early stages of what this board was about was very much, or this partnership was about, was very much driven by the requirement to get the integrated care strategy in its early form over the line. And I think the real challenge has been to say, okay, we've done that. We recognise it was a document that had to be produced within a particular timescale, and therefore we want to build on that somewhat, as we revise that document. But then there's also now the moment to actually start to work out what it is that this partnership can usefully do. And as I say, I think the points, I think the whole report actually shot through with useful proposals and insights, but I particularly pick out the couple of paras as I did, because I think those give us some quite concrete ideas of what it is that we'd be wanting to do. So I will leave it there for a moment, but really open to colleagues to put in any of their thoughts at this stage. Shane, I think you were indicating, were you?
Was indeed, Chair, thank you. But I think we can all place on record our thanks to the people that organised that, and I think it was a very useful session to air some of the, I suppose, conflicting priorities as we move towards a different system. And I think nothing emphasises that more for me, I suppose, under 2.5 as well, that we need to shift this to something very different, and like the preventative agenda that features throughout there and features throughout the entire conversation. And I think this is where this ICP really has a role in ensuring that the policy, if we are going to move, as this document says, to prevention, and how that then meets the reality of it, because some of the other documents underneath the rest of this agenda are not very measurable in preventative elements. It's very outcome focused, and how do we measure something? So the rhetoric of the discussion was brilliant, and then most of the rest of the agenda doesn't focus on prevention at all. It's how do we measure things that are measurable. Prevention isn't, by its very definition, measurable in some of its ways. So that's what I think that's the biggest challenge, Chair, is how we meet. So I'm trying to go through you and look through you to speak. How do we go from the policy rhetoric that we agreed and discussed, which was very useful, to the reality that the rest of the agenda says, which is all very metrics and log frame and whatever it's called. It's going to be a challenge because there's a complete juxtaposition, really, between the aims of what we seem to want and how we seem to want to then do it in practical policy terms. Thank you.
Thank you. Sedi, did you want to come in?
Yeah, I'd really like to support that position, and I think that will be the ultimate test of us working together as a partnership, because not all of the outcomes will be the responsibility of any one single organisation or part of our integrated care system. So the ultimate test of us working together in partnership, I think, will be how we're able to define those outcomes, align and assign responsibility for delivery, because what we will have, I think, is everyone making a contribution, and the aggregate of that contribution will be the outcome we'll be able to measure against. And that's where we talked previously, and in my view rightly, about mutual accountability. And the fact this is not a scrutiny body, this is a body where we hold each other to account. So if one part of our system is required, is expected to play their part, and for whatever reason, and there'll be lots of reasons, they're unable to, which then in turn limits our ability to deliver the outcomes that we clearly want, I think that's where the conversation needs to be. Not in an adversarial way at all, not with a blame culture, but one of mutual support. So I'm just supporting you absolutely, Shane, and I think part of our maturity as an ICP will be how we come together to have those discussions, because we've touched on them in different ways over time, and my sense is everyone around this table has a contribution to make individually and on behalf of the organisations they represent, and that, I think, Roger, will be the acid test.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Roger. Just briefly, because I've raised it a few times here, and I never give in if I think I'm right, and that is the 106 stuff, that we do need a more holistic approach across Kent and Medway. You know, Medway, click the button on here, but the rest of Kent, the button don't click till here, and we're losing out on funding and developments for the residents of Kent and Medway. And I think a more holistic approach about what should the 106 trigger be, and what do we spend 106 monies on, and have a better view of it, and plan for spending it. Not, oh gosh, you know, there's £30,000 there, we've suddenly got to spend on a capital project because that's the way the NHS works. You know, there's a whole story here, and I know we've got staff working in the background, but let's make it a more holistic approach, and that they're not working piecemeal in Swale and Dartford and Gravesham and here, but they're looking at it overall. And as I say, if the trigger in Medway is 10 houses or 10 accommodations, why should it be 20 in Swale and other places? You know, we're losing out on money, we're losing out on benefits for our residents, and that is something that we can work together and actually all benefit from. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Angela. Mandy, I think probably many of us have sort of scars on our back in relation to many things to do with Section 106 and its various successors, actual or putative. Any other comments? I was just going, yes, please.
Oh, I've got to, is that working? Our contracts are set. Let's try that one. Don't hold the button down. Right, there we go. So from a GP point of view, we have a national contract, and then we work regionally. And getting those two things to align is very, very challenging. And how do you get that reflected in this sort of document? And similarly, I noticed that in the 6 objective, number 5, I think, was allowing a patient to go to a local hospital should they need it. And I think most GPs would support that. However, national policy isn't that. National policy is to offer choice, and we're being told we have to offer choice. So it's something, those sort of tensions, I think, are quite difficult to resolve, and if it's not reflected in these sort of documents, then we're not dealing with it. We know it's there, but we're not dealing. So it's just an observation, really, that I just wanted to flag up.
Thank you. I think that's very valid and welcome. I think there are one of the things we've discussed before is there are, I say tensions, challenges, call it what you like, about what we do at which level in all sorts of ways. I mean, you mentioned national and regional and so on. There is also what we do as a system across Kent and Medway, what is done more locally through place, and all sorts of other. There are about 3 or 4 different ways actually of slicing things up. But one of the things we identified, I think quite rightly, in those conversations that day and we have it coming up in a moment on our agenda, is in relation to the relationship particularly to, for instance, health and care partnerships. Also one thing which I think I've been very preoccupied with is that we rightly here focus on wider determinants and the impact that that will have. But how does that then feed through to what is then done at a more of a locality level? It's not, and we've always said this, it's not a simple top-down relationship, but equally it cannot be that we simply strategize here and avoid, and that is not meaningful in terms of what then follows through on the ground. And I think, again, some of the recommendations that we had coming out of the day in terms of our own work programme, priorities, seeking to achieve at a local level some of, for instance, the shift towards prevention that is talked about in the Hewitt review, which was also coming out at around the same time and is cited here in the document. Those are really, really important things for us to pick up on. So, anyone else to comment on this? Yeah, please.
If I may, just by way of illustration, I'm just picking up a discussion that I had with Angela before the start of the meeting. We were talking about housing. And if we look at our first shared outcomes about giving children the best start in life and work to make sure they're not disadvantaged by where they live, we were reflecting on the fact that poor quality housing costs the NHS £1.4 billion a year. And that impacts on children's ability to have the best start in life. We're reflecting on the tragic case of the young boy in Rochdale, Awa Bishak, who died in a damp flat, or because of living in a damp flat. And as an integrated care partnership, I would hope at a partnership level, but also at the governance level that sits below the ICB and is linked to the Integrated Care Board governance framework and the work that Govinda's leading on, we'd want to have housing involved in these conversations, because if they're able to maintain warm, dry, safe places for children to grow, then delivering part of, or that's their contribution to delivering that part of our shared outcome. And it has the added benefit of potentially reducing the cost to the NHS, maybe not from £1.4 billion a year, but something very much lower. So that's a real example of where I believe the Integrated Care Partnership has a role to play in having conversations at many different levels, including neighbourhood, including place, but right through to this committee in terms of meeting our objectives. So that was just, if I may, through you, Rogers, an example of how working together we can achieve our objectives. Thank you.
Yeah. Teresa.
Yeah, thank you. And further to that, thinking of how we're going to achieve outcomes, the way that I'll be looking at outcomes is on that very place-based basis through the health and care partnerships. And I'm afraid the playing field's not level, is it? If you've got a health and care partnership, as we have in Medway and we have in Swale and indeed in Thanet, where deprivation is high, the ability of those partnerships to achieve the same outcomes that we're hoping to achieve across the whole of the ICB area is impaired by the level of deprivation. So I wonder, in your deliberations, if there was a discussion about how to manage funding to give a hand up to those health and care partnerships where deprivation is a limiting factor in terms of the way that we can do things like improve housing. You know, there's no doubt, but where housing is worst, deprivation is greater. There are things locally that Medway Council can do, and absolutely will be very determined to do them. But this partnership's sort of about putting our money where our mouth is. And if we're determined to make sure that everybody has the kind of outcomes that are described here, then we're not all starting from the same place. And I wonder if that discussion was had, and if it hasn't been had, I wonder if it ought to be had.
I would say I think to some extent it was, particularly when we look at prevention and a little bit like if you go back some years, some of the public health work that was done was very deliberately focused across the lowest, I think it was 10% lower super output areas and so on across Kent and Medway. And I think in a similar spirit, if we're looking at areas of work on prevention, then I think you would very naturally wish to see that targeted in specific ways, not least because if you're, and I should probably upset Shane with this if I sound too much as though I'm putting sort of numerical targets on it, but you would expect to see and hope to see some of the greatest achievements in terms of narrowing health inequalities, achieving real return on that, benefit coming from that commitment and that investment by targeting on those most deprived areas. Now, I think there's a whole other area of the funding that passes through the ICB to health and care partnerships and to the wider health system, which is a mystery I do not dare go into too deeply, well above my pay grade. So I think that may be a slightly different argument, but I would think in the areas that we're talking about, absolutely, that it should be targeted, and I think that's something that, again, we would probably want to make part of the work of this partnership, would be my suggestion. Paul?
Sorry, thanks, Roger. It was, I didn't...
Sorry, Paul, I think, like many people, you're maybe not quite close enough to the mic or whatever, it's...
Is that better? Yeah. I didn't have the benefit of being at the workshop, but the write-up is really helpful. I wonder if, by way of a practical way forward, if we said that we were comfortable with the recommendations in paragraph 2.4 and 2.5, those are the ones that you highlighted, Chair. I think it picks up Councillor Murray's point in terms of how the HCPs are funded. I was just going to make an additional proposal, because that would leave us with 8 things to do. There was a logical 9th one that fell out to me, which was to check if we had the governance right and to check if we had the right support to the Integrated Care Partnership Board. And I don't know if you covered it that afternoon, but it would feel like it would be the right time to do it. So I wonder, as a proposal building on the recommendations, if we adopted the 8 and added a 9th one, which is how do we do it, would that be a way forward that we could adopt out of the workshop?
I think it would be certainly from my point of view, a very good one and a very congenial one. I think if I think back to my previous experience chairing the Health and Wellbeing Board, I think the great problem we had, I mean, there were many things, very useful things done in that, but one of the challenges, I think, was who really owned it, who supported it, what happened between the meetings. Now, it was supported, things did happen between the meetings, but it was very much, the sort of the swan paddling frantically below the surface to get you from one meeting to another. And I think actually the pattern of support that could also then link into the question of how does this partnership relate to many of the other key players, particularly those at a local level, I think would be a really, really important way to do things. So I would thoroughly support that. We mention also in here that it talks about the next development session in November. So are we looking, as I understand it, I'm not quite sure even where I'm looking to on this, that we would have the symposium in October and a further development session, which doesn't strike me as a bad idea at all. I think it works well. I think the symposium, when we had it last October, did a really good job in drawing in a much wider partnership and ensuring that we all were bought into and committed to an overall approach, which, as I always say, this is not a top-down set of relationships. We can't dictate what the myriad players involved in this actually do. What we can do is ensure that we have a shared vision and that people take that away to be able to work on that and deliver on that in localities, in communities, and so on. So I think actually that wider support building function of the symposium and then another development session for this board in November, I think would work extremely well. But meanwhile, presumably we are to task those who support this partnership some of whom are here today, some of whom are not, but to take away and start to develop what is in those recommendations, including the one that you've added, Paul. Good. Is that agreed? That seems to me to be a good way forward. Any other comments on this? If not, then thank you very much. We can then, and I think, essentially we've been asked to, well, I think we've done this. We've been asked to note the key messages and actions from the development session and consider next steps. And I think that's what we've done. So, good. Thank you. Then I think one of the things that, as I said, came out of that discussion, and to be fair, we had discussed here as well, was health and care partnerships and the relationship really between, certainly this partnership and indeed its links to the ICB, and then from that the links into health and care partnerships and how that worked in sort of both directions. So we move on naturally enough to the health and care partnerships report. And Vincent, over to you.
Thanks very much, Chair. And again, I think there is a really clear connection between the discussions we had at the ICP Development Day and this paper. And the action was for us to share with each other more knowledge about what the role and purpose of health and care partnerships are and how that interfaces with the integrated care partnership. So this paper's been written as a position statement and really from the perspective of the Integrated Care Board in terms of our position and outline of health and care partnerships and where they fit within our partnership and delivery structure of the integrated care system. So I'm going to take the paper as read, and I know that I've got health and care partnership leaders here around the table as well, so really welcome their inputs around areas that they would want to emphasise from being the people that are leading those partnerships as well as leading the delivery and bringing together of partners at a place level. A couple of things that I wanted to just emphasise by way of introduction. So health and care partnerships as a vehicle predates the Integrated Care Board's establishment. They've been operating for a number of years in Kent and Medway. We have 4 health and care partnerships. They are partnerships at a place level, at a geographical level, that bring together partners not just across health and local authority, but also across the voluntary sector, but also across primary care partners as well. And they really are the engine room for helping us drive delivery of strategies like the integrated care strategy and our shared outcomes, but also supporting us to drive delivery of transformations to pathways of care, for example, where we need to do things differently to support our population. We've got many examples that we've seen over the last couple of years of where they've been absolutely crucial in making sure that we make the connection between having a system-wide strategy and what we do at that local level that reflects the needs of those populations that are different across Kent and Medway. And so from the perspective of this paper, what we've described is an ICB perspective on how we are developing and working with partners at a place level. We've been very clear as an integrated care board that we want to move to a position where there is greater delegation to health and care partnerships as a vehicle to deliver that change and transformation. But we recognise that actually at this point in time, health and care partnerships are not a statutory vehicle, and therefore the accountability for delivery of those transformations and changes remains with the Integrated Care Board. So the paper very much sets out where we would expect to move to over the next couple of months and years in discussion with health and care partnerships, the areas that we would want to work together on in terms of that move towards delegation and providing a really clear definition of what delegation means to us at this point, but also where the opportunity exists for us to go further and beyond what we're currently doing now. And I think it's helpful for this partnership to understand some of that work, but also to invite our colleagues who are the leaders of health and care partnerships to talk about the really active and vibrant partnerships that already exist and where they are, because they are at different stages of development across the 4 areas. And I think it's very helpful that we have a mixed economy of leadership of health and care partnerships, from local authorities to also health in terms of our different providers, but also there are opportunities for those local partnerships to really think about how they're engaging with our neighbourhood teams and our primary care networks across the system. Because again, even within a place, there will be variation. And I think the point that Angela made around actually there are differences even within a place area in terms of the level of deprivation or the areas of inequality that may be need to be tackled or actually focused on at different times. Health and care partnerships do create an opportunity for us to also think about how we focus some of our attention on improvement, but also how we take an improvement approach to share the learning around things that we do to improve quality and experience. And also there are opportunities for health and care partnerships to be much more fleet of foot in thinking about how they scale up some of that change rather than us just trying to do that at a system level. I think there's a really clear description in the paper around what would be different from the point of view of one of the functions that the NHS Kent and Medway ICB has, which is around the commissioning of health services. And I think we've made the point quite clearly here several times that actually in order to achieve our ambitions in our integrated care strategy, we will need to work differently. And that means we need to work differently as well as health commissioners around how we work both in an integrated way with others that commission services, but also through that delegation route to delegate some of that commissioning responsibility and function to a more local level, closer to people where they live and where they receive services. I'm going to stop there really and open it up for discussion because I think the paper is fairly comprehensive in terms of the information that's provided. I hope that it goes some way to helping understand where the health and care partnerships sit. But there will be more for us to think about as a partnership in terms of how we continue to engage both up and down our delivery and partnership structures, but also think about other opportunities that might exist to bring in wider partners, both to the integrated care partnership, but also at a place and neighbourhood level as well.
Good. Thank you, Vincent. Right. John, let's start with you.
Thanks very much, Roger. Thanks, Vincent. And obviously, as chair of the West Kent Healthcare Partnership, take a keen interest in the paper. I think one thing I'd particularly like to point out, in section 1, it says healthcare partnerships may work towards becoming an integrated care organisation over the next 5 years. I think that statement's, in effect, the wrong way around. Healthcare partners are integrated care organisations and have been from the very beginning. The issue is how effective they are. It is, to me, a waste of time and energy to talk about the form of them, because we're virtual organisations and will always be virtual organisations because we're, as Vincent said, we're very broad, health and care together, local authorities, health, voluntary sector. Housing's a very important part, Maidstone Borough Council and the work they're doing in West Kent in terms of Shepway and Parkwood on housing, which is all emanated from the Healthcare Partnership, is a good example of that. So I think the key thing is how effective can we be in terms of improving the health and well-being of our local population, and within that, the neighbourhoods within our local populations. And we should be held to account for that, because we're the doers. So by all means, working out what's the best way to be held to account. Is it here? Is it the ICB? You know, we can work through that in terms of our contribution to delivering on the integrated care strategy. Because our plans and priorities, which are in here, you need to check that they're aligned to the integrated care strategy, which, you know, Paul's team can do behind the scenes, but it's not there. So I think that's important. So it's really, you could say, a maturity index or whatever in terms of the spectrum of being a really brilliant integrated care organisation. I think the second thing I wanted to say was just on primary care. There's certainly in West Kent, and I'm sure it's the same in the other 3 healthcare partnerships, we are extremely keen on moving to developing integrated neighbourhood teams, and that is an overarching priority for us. And that is really changing the way that we work, because at the moment, in everybody's neighbourhoods, we have 6 or 7 teams, from primary care to community services to social care, all working as individual teams, and there are handoffs. And the idea is to have one team. You're always going to have different employers. That doesn't matter who the employer is. But one team wrapped around the patient or the individual, so that we bring physical and health needs together, and social needs, and the wider determinants of health all around the individual. So I think the importance of integrated neighbourhood teams, and also to support primary care and in terms of their sustainability, is fundamental, I think, to what we need to do, certainly in West Kent, and I assume it would apply to the other 3. So there's 2 main points, Roger, I'd like to make. One thing you might want to think about, or we might want to think about in the future, is we are the doers. We're not the only doers. Provider collaboratives. The system has to do some stuff as well, system-wide, particularly in specialised area. How we're held account for the doing. One thing we could do is, on a rotation here, show and tell what we're doing well, what we're not doing so well, what our barriers are. So, for example, in West Kent, we haven't got all the funding we would like for the 6 integrated neighbourhood team projects that we want to start. But we'll work our way through that. The key thing is how effective are we at delivering on those, or we could do them in the development session in terms of so that people understand a bit more on the ground, what we're doing on the ground, and how it links back to the strategy.
Thank you. I mean, my own thought on that, but clearly listen to what others say, is that something along those lines would be valuable, with a particular focus on the kind of work streams that we were talking about taking forward in the previous item, because I don't think we are here to do the role of a HOSC or something of that kind. And there's probably also then interactions between health and care partnerships and the ICB, which I don't wish us to be sort of muddying the waters as to who is doing what. But I think perhaps if we think about some of the areas that we wanted to focus on, as we discussed in the development session, and then to see how those are developing at the level of individual health and care partnerships, that may well be a good way to do it. And I perhaps tied into some of the indicators that we have within the report, but I think probably the spirit of this is not to be a mechanistic performance management approach, which is not what we're here to do, and as I say, to be particularly focused on the areas where this partnership can add value. But I think the principle of that is a really good one, and maybe we do rotate it, but we'll see what others think. Got quite a few other people who've indicated. Let me take a couple of those who are also speaking from an HCP perspective. Jackie, let me come to you first.
Thanks, Roger. It's really helpful to read the paper, actually, and a couple of comments about Dartford, Gravesham, Swanley. Shane's on the board as well. You may want to come in, Shane. I would say that from my perspective, there's real excitement at the HCP level as a feeling of potential for change. It's a size which feels sort of manageable to envisage doing things differently, but we are at different levels of maturity, and it does take time to work out how to do things differently. So I would certainly, for DGS, say that we're at the early stages of maturing, but with some achievements under our belt and some good plans around integration. I think delegation is unclear at the moment, and it's helpful to read the plans going ahead, and that will settle down over time, I feel sure, but at the moment it's a little bit unclear. The couple of things I wanted just to sort of highlight as worries. I think one thing is that the agenda is becoming overwhelming, even for HCPs now, because we're getting priorities and strategies coming from all angles. And, it's quite a heavy ICS from NHS England agenda. We've got our forward plan agenda. There's there's a lack of clarity about what is kind of held by HCPs and what's held by trusts and so on, which we're working out, but the agenda is very full. So for me, one of the questions is whether or not we are going to simply add layers into this system that become onerous, or whether we're going to take the approach of how best can we facilitate success at the HCP level. And one of my concerns when I was reading the papers today, and it slightly echoes what other people have said at different points in time in this meeting, is that with the best intentions in the world, there are questions for me about duplication at different levels, and particularly that's a challenge for this board, I think, in terms of agenda setting, what we should be doing, and also layers of accountability that create breadth in what we need to be doing, so that we do lots of things not terribly well, rather than a few things which we can hone down and focus on. So I think it does raise for me the question as to exactly how the ICP is going to function when there are so many other sort of sources of agenda and oversight meetings and metrics. Where is the gap and where is the value added? So exciting times for HCPs, but a real danger of getting bogged down. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. And it's not a criticism to say that I remember you making some of those points very strongly in the early stages of the development day, and I think the points are very well made, particularly around and again, I would try to link that to the conversation with John a moment ago about what we focus on here. As I say, it's not for us to be trying to do a sort of massive oversight and performance management job of every aspect of the health and care system across Kent and Medway. That work should be done there are several places where that should be done, and it's not here. But I think if we establish a few of those key priorities that we were talking about from the point of view of this partnership and engage with HCPs on those, then I think we actually start to clear a bit of the undergrowth away and focus on what is important. And I think probably bringing some ideas on that back into our future sessions will be really important. Now, just to say, I've got a few people who've indicated on this item. I've got Neil, I've got Paul Bartlett, I've got Claire Bell, I've got Angela, I've got Shane. Am I missing anyone? And Govinda. And Neil, right, so I'm going to guillotine it at that point. So if I just, so I'll go first to Neil, East Kent, Neil.
Thanks very much, East Kent Health and Care Partnership. So I won't dwell on it, but I absolutely agree that the ICP concentrating on a few priorities, being very outcome concerned, and less is more is probably the over driving thought in my head. I absolutely share Jackie's excitement. We are, as both John and Jackie have said, we're sort of at an early stage. Although we've been around, I think there's been more significant progress within our HCP within the last year, 18 months, than we had, a lot more progress than we'd had before that. And of course, now we are stepping into another stage with a memorandum of understanding with the Integrated Care Board. We're receiving a lot of money and people that we didn't have before, so our responsibilities are rising. I think there is a danger there that we then become too much an NHS body rather than the partnership that we are. So we're determined, whatever governance arrangements we agree, we have to absolutely maintain the objectives of our partnership and make sure that we are pursuing the right things rather than simply being sort of accountable for some NHS money and commissioning of services. I think that's overcomable. I actually believe that the relationships that I've seen with local authorities, including KCC, but also the district authorities at health and care level, the level of support we've had from public health and the involvement of the voluntary sector and others, I think it is vibrant, and I hope it will continue to be vibrant as we build our responsibilities, because that can sometimes be a bit more difficult. And we will sort out the delegation and governance arrangements, and at some form within us will be a subcommittee of the ICB, but that will not dominate the whole health and care partnership. We've achieved really significant things around food poverty, of starting work, as John has said, in terms of integrated neighbourhood teams, which we see as absolutely critical, working alongside primary care networks. And we do have, I think, a very realistic, and I hope realistic, focus on health inequalities. And one of the things you see is bringing together key players. For example, last meeting, we launched an estates strategy. That is to say, looking at our estates in local authorities, in the health service, in every bit of the health and care partnership, about how we're using our estates and how we can rationalise that. So it is that having a very different approach and working out how we can use buildings in different ways and actually do them from the benefit of the user rather than us as individual organisations. So I think that's been really important, and we are developing within East Kent a provider collaborative, as it were, which will look at the ways in which we all operate together. I think actually one of the most encouraging things has actually been our work with primary care and GPs working alongside in the clinical cabinet within that. So I think enormously hopeful about the potential of the health and care partnerships, and obviously we will be looking both to the ICB and the ICP for making sure that we are following in terms of the vision there, but also I hope reflecting the vision of the people of East Kent and the neighbourhoods, and really concentrating on what their needs are and how we orientate our services so that they fit their needs rather than what in the past we've done too often, which has been organisationally led.
Thank you. I think that's tremendously strong and helpful, and actually I think again plugs into partly the role of this board, which is that or this partnership, that we can seek to assist on keeping that perspective wider, as you said, in terms of what the HCPs do. Now, I'm a little conscious of time because theoretically we have 4 more minutes on this item, and then we have a heroically optimistic 5 minutes on the update from the ICB, which, if we can keep it reasonably punchy, I would be grateful, just because of the fact that we need to hit these impossible deadlines. So, Paul, you're next.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a very quick point about in the HCP achievements, Appendix A, there's reference to health checks being carried out on a pilot basis in a community larder, I think in Sheppey, that is. I'd like details of that, because it sounds to me, from the outcomes that we have here, 278 new customers identified. Though that is a good route into identifying health needs. So I think if we can have the partners circulated with how it was rolled out, where it has been rolled out as a pilot, then I think we can take away, or District Council can take away as an action to roll it out elsewhere.
Thank you very much. I've got Claire next.
Yes, thank you. Also, just a very quick question about the line in the report about integrated care partnerships may work towards becoming integrated care organisations. I just wondered exactly what that meant. What's the difference between an organisation and a partnership, and what difference will it make to our residents?
Thank you. Vincent, do you want to come back on that?
Thank you. So I think as John's alluded to already, at this point in time, because health and care partnerships are not statutory vehicle that's recognised. They're partnerships. So actually an organisation would mean that actually it has some stronger governance form, but actually there's not a lot of difference in terms of what we would actually see on the ground in terms of working together. So at this point in time, it's a partnership where people are voluntarily working together. That presents some challenges in terms of some of the things we may want to do around delegation. But if they became accountable care organisations, and I think the wording there, accountable care organisations, means that it would be a formal vehicle in which we could delegate accountability to. So I'd just re-emphasise my point earlier that at this point in time, although we are agreeing memorandum of understandings or developing them with health and care partnerships, the accountability for the areas that they deliver will remain with the Integrated Care Board, and that is why in governance terms we will also be agreeing with health and care partnerships that they would become a subcommittee of the Integrated Care Board for those areas that we delegate responsibility or authority to them around. So that's the main difference. But again, you know, historically, there was a move to creating accountable care organisations as a vehicle to drive that forward.
Thank you. That's very clear. Angela, you're next.
2 points. The second point is, I mean, I raised it here some time ago, on the where you're looking at metrics for respiratory in each of the four groups, we do need some sort of mechanism for why. And I think what I raised here was, look, if you've got a high incidence of respiratory issues suddenly come up at Strood, then is there a way that those GPs can feed the information? Because local authorities do the air, well, you do it yourself anyway, but local authorities do the air quality monitoring. You know, you can move your bits of kit and all the rest of it. So, you know, that partnership working, don't just sit and say, oh, you've got high incidence of that there, we need to put more effort into getting people seen. Well, let's try and, you know, in terms of the wider determinants, let's try and get to the bottom of why it's suddenly causing a problem. And the other issue was transparency of KPIs. I do get that commissioning should be at an ICB level, and I've not got a problem with that, but it's the HCPs where the data will come through that will, okay, Sheppy's got a real problem with not being seen on X, Y or Z. Not having got any problems apart from can't breathe. I have a problem with examples, but well, what should it be? I've got no idea. I've checked the website. I've got no idea what the contracts say, how long I've got to wait for this, that or the other, because there's nothing up there. So I think that sort of stuff should be going down to the HCPs, because they're the ones that we're going to feed through to. I mean, yeah, I could well email SEDI and say, oh, SEDI, you've got a problem on Sheppy with people waiting too long for X, Y and Z. But it'd be much better if it was all fed through to the HCP so they can see, you know, well, you're commissioning this and they ain't doing their job, are they? What are you going to do about these contractors? In the same way as if they weren't patching the road or building a new road or bridge or all the rest of it, you'd have the contractors in and be fining them on all the rest of it. So it's all very well saying you're the commissioner, but where the information is going to go, where the issues are going to go, are to the HCPs, and they need the transparency of the KPIs, in my humble opinion, so that we can have a, let's work together. There's an issue here, how can we sort it? Thanks, Roger.
Thank you. Sedi, did you just want to come back on that quickly?
Very quickly, and this is an uninformed response, Angela, because Paul here and Vincent here who'll be able to add a lot more to that. But I think the point that you make is a very valid one. And earlier on, there's reference to the importance of HCPs being fleet of foot. Unfortunately, there are other parts of the system that are not that fleet of foot when it comes to budget allocations, for example, moving money around, committing funds in one direction, and then trying to pivot into another direction quickly. So I think it's a really important point that Angela raises, and I think one for colleagues in the ICB and our local authorities to think about, because unfortunately, I don't know, Paul, we want to add a little bit more to that, but I think it's quite difficult for us sometimes to be as responsive as local communities would like us to be. But when we talk about HCPs, they're the interface, undoubtedly, but then it's how the rest of the system is able to respond. I don't know, Paul, have I overstepped the mark?
No more than normal, Chair. Sorry. No, and seriously, I think it's right. I think, but I would add, and it is to add, that I think this is a really important paper because I pick up the issues that have been raised by chairs, and there is a need for clarity. But I also would say that HCPs have only been around for 2 or 3 years, and like other parts of our conversations, we mature, we grow, and we bring clarity as we work through this. So I think it's helpful, but Vincent, I think, started his presentation and said, we haven't got it all right yet, and we haven't.
Thank you. Now, I am failing miserably in time management.
Sorry.
Yeah, Neil, yeah, do you want to come in and maybe
very briefly,
your additional point as well, maybe?
Thank you, Roger. Time is against us, so very brief comments if I could. I was chair, of course, of Medway and Swale until very recently. That's now been taken by Joe Palmer, so I guess Joe will be invited to future ICP meetings, please, if she could. My messages are also very positive, very much like John, Jackie, and Neil, so it's an amazingly enthusiastic and ambitious HCP for Medway and Swale. A real clear set of priorities going forward, and some very good successes recently around population health management, around the CDC, around virtual ward, and various other initiatives. We are ambitious for more responsibility and more delegation, as Paul and Vincent will know, but there's a clear process to pursue here in terms of that very programmed and structured delegation of responsibilities and the resources that may flow from all of that. So there is a challenge, I think, still with PCN engagement, so that's difficult, probably across the patch, and certainly in the context of RH and CP, and there needs to be more engagement, more clarity. We've talked about relationship and clarity between HCP and ICP about this partnership. I think there needs to be more investment and time and clarity with PCNs too in all of this. My view, as I say, is amazingly ambitious for Medway and Swale, the place, want to make a real difference across all 6 priorities. The alignment is very clear with the priorities in terms of the broader system, our priorities as an ICP, and indeed the ICB priorities too. So good alignment there, but I think I'd just like to see more pace, more opportunity, and more delegation as we go forward, which won't be a surprise to Paul and other colleagues in terms of this debate around HCP aims and objectives, Roger.
Thank you very much, Neil. And then I've got Shane and Govinda, and then we will draw a line under this. I think there might be a microphone issue, Shane. Yeah,
there we are. There we are. I agree with Jackie, Chair. Thank you for that. I think there is an exciting agenda, but I think it starts with our earlier point of getting the governance right. I think if we see them as merely engine rooms in this way, and I think it speaks to Teresa's point about the variation that is required, if they are just a blanket and universal, here's your delegations, it's got to be tailored in this way to those local needs. And that's where the terms of reference matter. Can I just pay tribute to Ian O'Connor, Chair, who is a former director of GGS, who's just retired after long service to the NHS. I'm sure Jackie would want to do that as well. And one of his real things he did before he left was making sure those local terms of reference met those principles that we seek to meet here. And it required some editing, because it cannot just be a carbon copy of whatever is at Kent and then we do locally. Otherwise it meets Jackie's point of duplication. We've got to get that subsidiarity. We've got to interpret the strategy locally. Because if it's just here's a Kent-wide approach, well, the issues of Dover are very different to the issues of Dartford. And while there'll be some similarities, if we try to try and help 1.6 million people in the same way, we are going to have problems. And that is why we cannot have just a one system fits all county-wide top-down approach, because it simply does not fit the variations on the level playing field, Teresa, that you rightly mentioned. So it's got to have that level of fleet of foot flexibility. It's not going to get that if it's just, here's just minor scheme of delegation. It's collective accountability, but it cannot just be collective responsibility. And that's how that variation needs to take place.
Very good, thank you. And Govinda.
Thank you. Just following on from Shane's point, So I chair the Inequalities Committee, and the bulk of our budget is delegated out to health and care partnerships. And for me, as someone who works in the charity sector, and for me, the key message is for the HCPs, they need to be brave, because a lot of us have had these conversations the last 10, 15, 20 years. And it's about, for me, the HCPs looking at kind of new ways of potentially working and linking in more widely. There's still, for me, very heavy public sector focus, which is great, but I think the voluntary sector got a key role to play. You know, you look at prevention, sports got a key role to play, arts, got the Chief Constable here in some of the work, obviously Kent Police are doing. I think it's how we link that together at that local level. As Shane is saying, there's no point having something at central and you're trying to push it down around Kent. Dover and Dartford are very, very different. But HCP is really, I think, quite integral in terms of the work around fighting inequalities. But don't keep doing what we've been doing in health for many, many years. And I think this is a real opportunity. It's the first year, obviously, of the ICB. And I just do feel when it gets to that ward level, that district level, street level, neighbourhood level, voluntary community sector have got a key role to play. Some HCPs, voluntary community sector is very heavily involved. Showcase Medway and East Kent and other areas, it's not. And it's not from a lack of willingness or lack of interest. So if we can, just be brave and let's go for it, really.
Thank you very much. Great. I think we've had some very useful comments on this all round. Neil, by the way, I assume yours is a legacy hand. Is it? Neil's, yep. I appreciate that's so 2020, that phrase. But anyway, thank you anyway. Thanks everybody for comments on this. And I think there are actually several specific points that have come out of this as to how we, again, to come to my old obsession, a few priorities from this partnership and how they then link into the work with HCPs. And clearly there will be an evolving relationship between the HCPs and the system as a whole as well. So can I thank everybody who's contributed to this? And now with minus 5 minutes, actually, Paul, under the ICB report.
Thanks, Chair. There were some comments at this end of the table about being given a hospital pass for 5 minutes. Sorry, I'm not sure. I will try and do this in 5 minutes, including questions, if that's okay. So the part of this agenda was about the ICB in terms of review, but I also wanted to take a moment to update on where we're going, because that feels logical. So on the 5th of May, the ICB had its formal review with NHS England. That's NHS England using its statutory powers and its regulatory powers. And I will happily share the formal outcome of that, but there were three things that came out of that. There was a recognition that at that point the ICB was 9 months old and was therefore a very new organisation, and there was a real recognition that we had done some very good things. So examples that were quoted were about the work that had been done to minimise the impact on patients of a very difficult winter, where it was recognised that in Kent and Medway, patients waited for the least amount of time nationally to get them out of the back of ambulances and into ED. There was recognition that in 2 of our 4 acute trusts, the emergency department performance is some of the strongest in England, and that was recognised. And there was a real appreciation about the work that the mental health services, in conjunction with colleagues and friends in the police, had made around Section 136 suites, which has been a real game changer. So that was recognition. There was also recognition that we had been a player alongside colleagues around this table in terms of what we're trying to do, but that was in the early foothills, and a recognition of that. So the proposal that was made during the meeting, and as an NHS body, the ICB is rated in an assurance framework, and at the moment we're at level 3 of that, with 1 being the least support and 4 being the most. And the proposal that was made was that we should shift 1 peg from 3 up to 2. We haven't had that formalised yet, but that was what the proposal was. Then, inevitably, all of those things that were recognised, but much more to do, and that is absolutely recognised within the ICB. And the much more to do started this financial year with us being very clear about resetting our priorities. And we have established 6 priorities for the year ahead. And simultaneously with that, we are going through a top-to-bottom organisational redesign process that has 2 ambitions. One is to make sure that we are fit for the future in terms of what that looks like, But the other ambition, like all central NHS bodies, is to drive down our running costs by 30%, which is the ambition that is also shared with NHS England. And just to give colleagues around the table a sense of the scale of that, yesterday as a board we approved our annual budget for this year, which is £3.95 billion. The operating costs of NHS Kent and Medway are about £33 million, and we are ambitious to reduce those costs by £10 million. So just to give you a sense of the scale. We are partway through that process. It is not yet complete, but we would hope to be completing on that by the end of the summer. So lots done, an awful lot more to do, but I think what we have done in the first 9 months of the ICB is to build a platform from which to work, and that platform absolutely relies upon colleagues around this table and being part of a successful Integrated Care Partnership Board. I don't know if that's 5 minutes, Roger, but...
That is impressive. Thank you. There's probably time for about 1 or 2 comments and questions. Well, that's remarkable. Okay, I'm going to quit while we're ahead. So, Paul, thank you for that. And can I suggest we now take a pause? There is notionally it's 5 minutes. Probably turn out to be that by the time we're done. Time for everybody to take a brief break, get another cup of tea or coffee or whatever, and then I think we reconvene ASAP. But thank you very much. Our first item is the Integrated Care Strategy Assurance Approach. I have this down as being a combination of James, Anjan and Vincent. So I don't know who wants... James, you're the first on the list. Do you want to start, or who shall I go to? Oh, Vincent, right, okay. And Anjan, you're content with that as well, yeah? Yeah. Okay, Vincent, over to you.
Thanks very much.
Yes, that was really quite deft, wasn't it?
I thought I'd agreed it was James, so that we avoided it being me. But anyway, thank you.
It's very good to see an integrated approach.
Shared responsibility. Anyway, so thank you. This is a report that we've been working on for a little while in terms of firstly just making sure that we can really start to move forward from having the strategy to translating it into really clear actions, but also metrics that help us measure the impact of having a strategy with 6 shared outcomes. So a couple of things just to highlight, and then I am going to pass to James to talk more specifically around the work in terms of developing the long frame, as it's called, and the metrics. But since the partnership last met, we have been doing some work in particular in the NHS to develop a joint forward plan that sets out how the NHS is going to translate its actions across the 6 shared outcomes of the integrated care strategy. And there is a national timetable for us to produce a joint forward plan by June this month, and so we're in the final stages of moving that plan to approval and publication. But it is a plan that initially is for the NHS, in terms of NHS partners, to look at how they will deliver on the integrated care strategy ambitions. And we've worked particularly with NHS providers across Kent and Medway to develop a plan that really sets out over the next 5 years the specific actions that we'll be taking to support delivery of the strategy, but also to identify how we will measure those actions in terms of the metrics and how they will feed into the broader work we want to do with wider system partners. Now, in an ideal world, we would have wanted the plan to be a system plan, but the national guidance at the point where we were developing it required it to be an NHS plan. But we have set ourselves the ambition to review that plan on an annual basis so that it gives us the opportunity to, one, think about how we refresh that plan, but secondly, how we also build that plan towards it becoming a system-wide plan. And there is a connection there to the work that's also been undertaken and now published through the Hewitt Review, which we are going to consider a little later on the agenda. So, in essence, in terms of this paper, we really wanted to also highlight the work that we have been doing to drive forward our communications and engagement strategy. We are in the midst of the next phase of our communications and engagement program. We've been working again with partners across the system to ensure that there is a very comprehensive plan in place, and we are at the moment running a range of engagement programs in terms of there's an online engagement portal, but also we're running a number of live and in-person events that are being targeted at health and care partnership areas so that we can again engage with the population around the plan. The other thing to highlight is the work that we're doing through the Inequalities Prevention and Population Health Committee, and welcome Govinda as the chair of the committee here as well. But also we've taken a decision through that committee to have 3 subgroups so that we can really target our focus both on engaging partners in delivery of those objectives, but also in looking at where there are opportunities for us to move quicker and faster in terms of our focus. So again, those 3 subcommittees are now up and running. They have wide membership from across our system, and they are chaired by myself, Anjan Ghosh and James Williams, supported by our teams. So again, what I want to do is to really get to the point where we talk about the long frame matrix, because this is a significant piece of work that we've been working together across the system to ensure that actually we are really clear about how we will measure the difference that our strategy will make over a period of time, but also take that earlier point about how do we get a focus on a small number of things that we want to coalesce around and do well so that actually we can get some traction. And that was something that we've been taking forward in response to our early engagement with health and care partnerships at the start of the year, where there was a really clear sense that it was great to have an interim strategy, great to have a framework, clarity around the shared outcomes, but actually that we needed to provide some additional support to really helping them focus their attention on the things that are going to make the most difference. So if I can at that point perhaps hand to James to just talk a bit more about the long frame matrix, and then we'll open it up for discussion.
Thanks, Vincent, and great segue back. See, teamwork, Chair, we definitely get the flavouring right. I think actually the debate that we've had this afternoon already about what is it that we are here to do, how will we know that we are doing the, delivering the outcomes that we've described within our strategy, but also for our population, is at the heart of what we're trying to do with this log frame. It's just a simple way of just saying, these are the things that are important to us. These are the aspirations that we've set out, not least within our strategy, but also these are the ways in which we can measure whether we've achieved those outcomes that we've established. They're not set in stone. And if you look within the framework, we've left a few placeholders there because we're trying to articulate the actions that we as a partnership said, and if I might, so we're looking across the life course. We talked about giving children and young people the best start in life, so we've identified a number of things in there that we could, as a system, say, this is going to give us the opportunity to pursue that. We talk quite a lot in this meeting, but we also do work on inequalities, and we heard already some of the input there from the work that was done around the community larder and actually doing stuff on few, but how do we systematically look and get the proportionate bit, which I think is what Shane and other colleagues were talking about in terms of place-based working? How do we identify whether in patch X, patch Y, we're actually delivering that proportionate additional input? So we hopefully will be able to describe some of that. There's quite a lot of our discussions been about not doing to people, but seeing whether we're helping people to understand that they've got the capacity and capability within themselves to achieve. So in the log frame, you can see we've got indicators there about empowerment and how we can measure whether people now are actually coming forward and doing things like that. The other bit linked into that is the wider determinants bit and the spatial aspects. So, and you mentioned, didn't you, Angela, before, the 106 contributions and things like this. So equally, and back in the Hewitt review, remember, they're looking to see what proportion of our resource across our system, and I did make a note there, Paul, 3.95 billion, right? So a proportion of that, and it's for us to determine, and clearly we've got priorities that need to be delivered, but what's that journey? And how do we proportionately see whether that is going into the areas that we've identified as a priority for us? And critically, there is something that we've all got to recognise, and Councillor Murray and I were at a local Medway joint local health wellbeing strategy session this afternoon, and what we were looking at there, and what we were hearing, what people have been telling us in our patch about their needs. And these are expressed needs, and a lot of it, as you can imagine, was about NHS services. So quite clearly within this paper, we've got to be realistic. And that comes back to some of the conversations that we're talking about how we work within our health and care partnerships. Are we actually delivering and getting the equity bit right for our population? So again, within the log frame matrix, it sets out some indicators. Again, I reaffirm, these are not set in stone, but they are things that we need to consider as a partnership that will give us an understanding as to whether we're moving in the right direction. The other final points that I'd like to make before I open this up to a debate is, I've been party to, and I'm sure the colleagues in this room may or may not have been, but I could say I have, to discussions with the national team that have been looking at the outcomes framework that they're trying to develop as part of the Hewitt review. So in the Hewitt review, remember, they say they want to see whether partnerships, and Paul's already said we moved from a 3 to a 2, all right? But how do you conceptualise that? What does that look like? So they're coming out with a thing called a single outcomes framework, and this thing is not about measuring what you've done, it's about measuring whether you've got an understanding as to how to work together to do it. Our log frame, actually, I would suggest, just to us, and granted that we've got to look at the indicators, gives us the understanding that we can demonstrate that we've had those kind of discussions. And we're trying to think collectively across the whole system, not just about an NHS target, not just about a social care target, not just about working with the voluntary community sector, but how we actually contribute, and don't forget our other blue light services are in the room, how we actually all contribute to delivering the expressed outcomes that are in our strategy. So if I was going to then summarise all of that, looking at that guidance that I have seen and the feedbacks we fed into some workshops that have come back again, I think we're in a good place if we were to be assessed, which we will be by April 2024 as a partnership. That's your deadline, and that's what they're telling us. Did I say that? Obviously I've done. I've let the cat out of the bag. I'm in trouble now. We're being recorded, so I did it. But the context of all of that is I feel that we are in a very positive place because we're having those rounded discussions. And if I might, Govinda is hiding his lights, I think. The bits that members just need to be minded of is that because we've got these additional structures, the debate that you're having about how you measure that operational stuff is being had in those other forums. And that isn't to give you false assurance, because clearly we need to make sure that you get that information in here, but it's equally, it just gives this forum the ability to stand at the top of this thing, or, you know, we'll stand side by side because we're all trying to work laterally, aren't we? But to see whether the system is actually functioning, and we can then unblock stuff that may or may not be happening in those other spaces. So I'll close there and open up for questions, although I don't know whether Unjan's got anything to add to that. But I believe that this is a first draft. It gives us a sense to say, as a system, it's captured the things that we think are important, but we might think that there are other things that are important. This is now the time just to add and detract from that. Unjan?
Unjan.
Okay, yeah. So a couple of points. One is around the log frame itself. Now, the log frame, we could have gone down the route of a logic model. And what this is a kind of logic model where it's attempting to translate all those higher level outcomes into specifics. So it's almost getting to the business end and framing it in terms of outcomes. And it's not easy to do. And this is the first attempt at it. And it's trying to make the aspirations that we have real. The other thing I'd like to also mention, because the board does need to note this, is that the integrated care strategy is the de facto joint health and wellbeing strategy for Kent. And that was a conscious decision as a system that we took. And therefore, we are going out to all our partners locally to have a discussion. So we're going district by district to talk to them about the integrated care strategy, take feedback from them, as well as understand their own plans, because a lot of the districts, in fact, all of them have their own plans which link with this strategy, and we're trying to align it. We're also doing the same, a kind of similar conversation at the HCP level with our HCP partners, and also involving parish councils as well in those discussions, because we do want to ground it in the reality of the lived experience of our residents and have a lot of the energy and the momentum coming from that space. And Seti, you speak about building a movement, and this is kind of trying to start generating the momentum for that movement. Just to give you an idea of what we're doing in what Vincent talks about, so the prevention subcommittee I chair, we've agreed on 2 system priorities and 6 focus areas. So the 2 system priorities, one of them is to map what already is out there across each HCP footprint so that we know what already exists in order to build from that and add value. We are also going to develop some sort of a baseline based on the Hewitt Reviews conversations and points around that 1% spend on prevention, and trying to map out what's the baseline for the spend across the whole of the system. So those are the 2 system priorities. The 6 focal areas are mental health and substance misuse, smoking and tobacco control, obesity, and alcohol as well. And I'm forgetting one more, hypertension. And in addition to that, immunizations and vaccinations. And what we're trying to do is develop a work plan which is focused on 3 lenses. So the life course, most of these lend themselves to a focus towards children as well. speaking to the Robert Wood Johnson model, so there is a 20% element which is in that healthcare bit, but there's an 80% element in every single one of these, which is in that wider determinant space. So trying to really work out which bits are what, and also working out the lens of what's short-term, what's medium-term, and what's long-term. So there's a lot of work going on, a lot of energy, and a lot of excitement. Being here now 1 year and 3 months into the job, I liken Kent to a gigantic frigate, and I do start to feel that the hull of that frigate is ever so slightly starting to turn, so exciting times ahead.
Thank you all. Right, let me throw this to any questions or comments. Shane.
Thank you, Jay. You'd expect me to speak on this matter. We've often challenged as part of the ICB to do things differently, and my challenge back would be, prove to me that a dashboard and scorecard is doing things differently. Because isn't that what we usually do when we have a strategy and an action plan? Every strategy and action plan in local government I've been involved in 25 years has had these kind of metrics and targets. So if we are truly doing things differently, isn't it more we should be looking at the items you've got here from 4.6 onwards and asking how partners are meeting the overall aims in the widest possible sense and asking them to provide the evidence rather than some metric scorecard system that we can put in place? Because the challenge also is, how do we evidence prevention? We spoke about that earlier. If we are, in my long time in local government, we will spend and almost guarantee staff will put their energies into meeting these targets. They may be reflected on the health needs and preventative elements that we actually require to really change the system in another way. So who is this data for? Why do we need to collect it? What is the justification for it? Because my final experience of this tends to be, the more data we seem to collect, it tends to be for people that maybe aren't as closely connected to the services and they're quite far removed, so therefore need to have this oversight. If we're truly to make system change, my challenge is, what is the point of this? We need to have more qualitative context and change the very narrative than more scorecards and dashboards, because otherwise we're just doing the same. And what's going to change?
Shane, can I respond on that, actually? Because, sorry, or Sedi, did you want to? Right. I mean, my thinking is that actually what's different is the approach in 4.6. And I think it's a very good approach. And I don't think it's a case of either or, because if we've set a strategy, and I don't think we're looking here at, in any meaningful sense, targets, because the truth is only very indirectly does this partnership have the levers. It is not a very simple model. But I think having set a strategy, focusing on some outcomes, it is, I think, worth our while knowing what is happening. And now I take the point that these things can become a vast industry, which, and then the question is, what do you do with it? I think the question of what you do with it is it provides another source for asking questions. I think some of the questions, and also the way in which it's proposed to approach those questions, I think does give us some of that difference. So I wouldn't personally want to do without this in terms of the indicators, but I think we'd have them in the right place, is my view. So that's a personal view. But James, you were indicating, and I think Sedi, did you want to come in?
Well, I think it's very much to support your view there. I'm just looking, for example, and circling back to discussions that we had earlier. So if you look at the long-form matrix, G3, it talks about people from minority ethnic groups living in less deprived neighbourhoods will increase by 1%. Part of the journey to that will be defining those neighbourhoods, will be having the data that we need, will be the conversations that need to take place, because a number of members of the partnership have talked about ensuring that resources are directed in the right place, be that the HCP or elsewhere. This is what we need in order to have those conversations, and taking it out of anecdote and responding to who shouts the loudest into actually we do need to move money from point A or place A to place B, because to achieve these objectives, that's what we've got to do. So I think in terms of the overall direction, we can talk about numbers and so on over time. This is first draft. I'm very supportive of this.
Thank you. The question, Urchi, about, as you say, who shouts loudest, or perhaps put another way, how we decide what we focus on in some of these is an interesting and separate question, which I'd quite like to revisit. But I'm seeing some others. Jackie first, Teresa, Angela, I think I've seen, and then Paul.
Thanks, Roger. I totally support both assurance and some form of accountability and measurement for sort of achieving things. So I have a couple of issues which I think may be my own ignorance about the process, but I just wanted to raise them. I think one of the ways of interpreting this is that there's a risk that individual partners will actually become involved in an industry of showcasing everything they do under every heading. So one question I would have is whether it's fine to say, no, we're not, we've done nothing on these three, because actually we're doing an awful lot on two others. So that's sort of one general question. But more importantly, I think, I'm a bit concerned that what you'll have is an industry of people. Let's take the research one, because ChemPT does quite a lot of research, and we could spend a lot of time showcasing everything we do in research, which is what we were doing anyway, and doesn't have much to do with the whole innovation that comes with the ICB and the ICP. So I'm concerned that we really pick up on what are we doing differently to what we did before, and capturing that and doing in partnership as opposed to individually. That's my one sort of question issue area. And the other one is that there's an awful lot here which is about just doing process as opposed to making a difference. And maybe I've misunderstood how this will be used, but I am worried that we will at the end showcase how busy we've been doing, how busy we've been, and how ineffective we've been. So it would be helpful to perhaps understand those two areas a bit better.
Can I, forgive me a second, Teresa, I know James had indicated earlier anyway, may wish to pick up on a couple of the points made. So if I come to James and then I'll come to you.
Thanks, Roger. Just to that point, Jackie's raised, so looking at the framework. So we mentioned before that this is our first cut in our draft, and it's a great debate that we're having, but just to be really clear, so in the column that sort of says objectively verifiable indicators, we've struggled before because people are saying, what is it that we are going to measure? So it's not really us saying that these are the things that are important, it's our population. These are what people have said. If you'd have been in the workshop that I was just in earlier on, we were hearing really powerfully from people who had experienced trauma about the need to access mental health services. There's a clear one in here about what this, so this is us as a partnership. This is what our population is saying. And I think we've got to reflect on that, really we do. And as Director of Public Health, you know, I'll put my hand in the air. I feel that my job is to identify the things that we've got to prioritise, because they're the things that are impacting on the people that we live and serve for. So that's the first point. So it's not really about an industry, and I do want to make it really clear, because Jackie, your point around, are we collecting loads of data just for the sake of collecting data? No, we're not. Not in my opinion. What we're trying to do is to identify the things that we have already said and our population are telling us are important to us. And then the other column is, how do we know whether we've made a difference? So that's the outcome measure. And the outcome measure will be timed based on whatever the intervention is. So some of these things we'll be able to get outcomes on that a little bit sooner. So if we're looking at screening, for example, we'll be able to look at the time period, whatever the program is, determine whether people, and this is important, not just everybody, but the people that we're saying should be actually screened because they're not coming forward at this moment in time for whatever reason we facilitated that, are coming into that space. So just to be really clear, these aren't things that we've just made up. This is us trying to identify the outcomes that we has established, but based on what our population are telling us. And just by reaffirming, if we look at one really good one, so I'll go for this one here. All right, here you go. 4.3, we've got a timeline on there. This is one that I think will resonate. Increase to 60%. The people describing their overall experience of making a GP appointment as good. I don't think I need to say any more about that, because the context is, if you've got, and it doesn't really matter why you go to your GP, but if you come from that appointment feeling that you've had a good experience, then hopefully, from that perspective, going back to the empowerment bit, you will be more empowered then to either act on the advice that you've been given, or indeed deal with the issues yourself, or go off and whatever it would be. So the context for this is that we can amend it, and quite clearly I think we need to be constructive, but if we're not measuring, and this isn't about performance management, this is about outcomes that we're looking at.
So James, can I just come back in? Can I just come back in a minute? Because it may just be...
Yeah, we'll have to keep it relatively quick, folks.
I will be very quick, which is just to say that the appendix is very kind of outcome focused. I absolutely understand what you're saying. I think paper can be misleading, because the paper is talking about each partner saying what they're doing. They might give a case study. We could just say, what are you doing about applying research into practice? So I think, perhaps just for future reference, there feels to be a bit of a dislocate between what the paper is presenting and then in terms of your kind of table at the end, in terms of the hard outcomes. So I'm not disagreeing with hard indicators at all, James.
No, if I might for you, so I think what's happened there is, at our ICPOA day, there was a conversation about whether we wanted to do a deeper dive into an area, and I think probably that's been articulated in the paper in the context of what would be good for us as a system to have a lens on and to look. So I think that's, I hear what you're saying, Jackie. I think that's where that's coming from. So hopefully that's made that a little bit clearer. I think that was the Karen et al., where we'd had a conversation about, wouldn't it be good if we had a bit of a look on a particular area so that we can actually look at our performance rather than looking at everything. I think that was where they were coming from with that.
Okay, I've got Teresa, Angela and Paul. And then I would draw people's attention to the fact that, at least in theory, we're looking not only to decide how we want to approach this, but possibly pick out one of those areas in outcome one or whatever we call it. So just draw people's attention to that. But anyway, Teresa.
Yeah, I mean, perhaps working from the back, looking at the recommendations, we're not being asked to do very much other than comment today. And I think the last recommendation, you know, through you, Roger, is based on approval, identify a couple of things to report on for the next meeting. And I think some of the concerns that people have got, particularly you, Jackie, are probably about the way the reporting is managed, so that we don't want, you know, too much sort of showcasing. What we want to know is how people are getting on. And if we use the health and care partnerships roughly as, you know, the groups that tell us about the things that are happening on particular outcomes, I think that would be manageable. From my point of view, the log frame is quite useful, and the questions that are set out are not things that anyone sort of pulled out of the air, are they? They're things that the data's telling us now. So I think, Shane, if it addresses what I think is your concern, they're not supposed to be punitive targets that if you don't, you know, someone doesn't meet them, then somehow, you know, that makes that particular health and care partnership look bad. On the contrary, if there's difficulty in meeting them, it will give us an indication of where we need to direct resource to make sure that the playing field is level. And personally, I like measurable things. I think if you measure it, it happens. And you can disagree with me, but you know, otherwise it's all about sort of anecdotes and feelings as opposed to real things. And you know, if the things in the log frame don't happen, we're in trouble, or we just stay in trouble. You know, we stay challenged. We don't get the things that people were telling me they want to achieve this morning. And that, you know, that is very genuine that James is saying. You know, it was we heard some particular stories that had been picked out, but we looked at the results from a lot of focus groups. And honestly, truly, the things that people say accord with the things in this log frame. Wanting to be healthy, wanting to be happy, wanting to have enough money to provide for their family. And if we're serious about, you know, the difference between working in an integrated way and not, it's those kinds of things that we can really make a difference with. So I think, you know, we can have all the frameworks we like. This one's as good as any, but it seems to me to be a pretty good place to start. And if what this board can do is listen and take seriously the examples that people give us. You know, I would like people to come with bad examples of where they can't achieve things, as well as sort of window dressing of, you know, where everything's great and something's gone well, because that will tell us how much reality is there behind the log frame.
Thank you, Teresa. Angela.
Thanks, Chair. Now, over many, many years, I've been very anti-data. You know, oh God, the bean counters, it's keeping people in a job, it's a growth industry, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But I don't know if it's 97 or 98 when the government brought in a metric. We'll come to it. And I was on Kent Hosk in 2005, I think it was, when we, during that period where there were all these deaths from MRSA and other hospital-acquired infections. And if the government hadn't put this down as one of the metrics that you've got to record, now we all know that people had been dying of hospital-acquired infections for many, many years. It's put down as heart failure. Tell me somebody who dies in hospital who hadn't got heart failure, because I'd be very surprised. But it's what caused it that's never bothered being dealt with. And the government decided that that was one of the things they wanted to measure. And we all know what happened with MTW, wasn't it? It was mainly Maidstone Hospital, but it was awful. You know, hundreds of people dying of that it would have just been brushed under the carpet. And since then, hospital-acquired infections has been a metric in, I think, all hospitals, and you can monitor that, you know, if it ain't clean, do I want to be there? How many people died of MRSA or C. diff and all the rest of it? So I've come out of the collecting data for the sake of collecting data to actually, yeah, that was really useful. So I think it's got to be useful. And from what this is saying, it is related to what we want to do and what we want to achieve. It isn't data for the sake of it. So I have come down in the middle camp, I think we'll call it, because I'm not quite the other way yet. But if you can see, and our residents, because I've spoken to many over the years since this and said, yeah, but remember that? Yeah. So there's an awful lot of us now who don't think there's a lot of bin counters doing a job for the sake of doing a job. If you can see a relevance and, you know, related to an outcome, then these things are very good. And that's what I see here. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Angela. Paul.
I challenged James and Anjan to do something like this, so I really welcome it. I think it's very, very helpful. I think that there's an iterative process that we need to go through. I think we do need to set our baselines. I know it's a work in progress, so it's not a criticism, it's an observation, because I think, back to others' colleagues, we need to be really clear about the level of ambition. And the level of ambition comes about knowing where we start from and over what duration of time we want to move towards it. And my second point, having said I'm in support of it, which I absolutely am, it would be really nice if we could align this with the work about quality priorities, which is taking place in a more health-orientated bent, because I think we should do it once. I think it would be really helpful. So we should be ambitious, we should set our baseline, but the principle that comes out of this is one that I think is very, very welcome.
Thank you. Right. Can I thank everybody for their contributions on this? Actually, picking up a point that was coming through some of the discussion, and partly responding to Jackie's concern about sort of, you know, showboating and all the rest of it. I think it is very much a question of how this is brought forward. And I do note, interestingly, in, I think it's 4.5, looking at the, yes, 4.5 says something rather interesting, I think, which is it talks about how we can do this, allow the ICP to look in more detail at delivery of specific areas of interest, and to benefit from qualitative information from experts by experience, which goes back to some of the points we were raising in the development day about what we hear and from whom, and how we, in a sense, make this a lot more real. So I think the principles behind this are actually very good ones. And I do think that, just to reiterate, there is, to my mind, a significant difference between having outcome-based indicators that give you a sense of, are we going in the right direction, and could be a basis for questioning, as opposed to KPIs in a more narrowly institutional sense, where you're then trying to turn around and drive something in a very narrow executive fashion. So can I put forward now, what we've been asked to do is to comment on the log frame indicators, which I think we've done, to comment on and approve, and we'll see, not everyone may agree with this, I appreciate, approve the proposal for using key questions to focus discussions at ICP meetings on areas of highest interest. It then suggests, and I don't think we've really got to this at this point, because if the ICP approves the proposal, to comment on the proposed questions for outcome 1 and identify 1 or 2 to report on for the next meeting. Now, I suspect, I mean, I have a particular view on that, but I'm not sure we can just impose that at this stage. So maybe can I suggest that members of the partnership write back in afterwards, reflect on this, look at outcome 1, and come up with a view as to what you think that we should focus on those areas within outcome 1, because I don't think we've had the opportunity to really discuss it today. I would say, just for the record, on a personal view, is I would be nervous of a big focus on the SEND element within that, simply because that is something which is being reported on in a number of other places. And therefore, it is important. It's something which quite possibly we'd want to look at this place at some point. But that is a whole area where there is a huge amount of work to be done. It is subject both of a scrutiny committee within KCC and the partnership board, the SIAB, I think it is, which again addresses a number of those issues. So I'm just a bit concerned that in that key area, we would end up constantly trying to assess something in a lot of different places. But that's a very much personal view, and obviously focused on the Kent side of it rather than the Medway side. James, I think I've obviously provoked.
Thanks, Chair, and that's really helpful. And just to go back to Paul for the assurance, next week we've got at the Inequality Population Health Committee that Govinda chairs a report coming through on the quality metrics. So we've aligned this approach clearly with that, which gives you a more formal look at some of the actual data sources that Paul's referencing and gives you some of the baselines and some of the key indicators there. So just for information, but equally back to if members were then looking to see, because those reports will come to this committee. Not obviously that it will be the next time this committee meets, you'll get that sort of breakdown. So just by way of just forward doing that.
Good. Thank you very much. Can I take it that those recommendations are agreed? Thank you. Right. We move on to the joint forward plan. I'll go straight to Vincent. Conscious we have still have three quite significant items to get through. So, Vincent, let's come to you on this one.
Thanks very much, Roger. I'll be succinct because this item's coming to the Partnership for Information. As discussed at the Development Day, I think I've already highlighted the purpose of the joint forward plan in terms of the plan for the NHS, in terms of its translation of the actions it will take to deliver on the integrated care strategy. The joint forward plan has been consulted on with health and wellbeing boards, both in Kent and Medway, and it's also been considered by the boards of the 6 sovereign NHS organisations across Kent and Medway. And obviously the actions within the plan are specifically for NHS organisations and the Integrated Care Board. We've received feedback in addition from NHS England on our draft plan, and it is the draft plan that's attached. We're working through all of the comments that we've received, some of which have been really helpful, and we will integrate into the final plan, which will be approved this month. We're particularly wanting to make sure that the plan really focuses on the areas that are most important for us to drive forward in year 1 and year 2. The plan will be refreshed on an annual basis so that actually we can take account of changes for our population, but also areas of focus that we need to give more attention to. The final point I'd make is that obviously since the plan's been in development, we have seen the publication of the Hewitt Review, and that makes a number of recommendations, one of which is that joint forward plans could be developed to be system plans, but also that we give greater emphasis to thinking about the work we want to do together around prevention. And from an NHS perspective, we welcome those recommendations, and we'll consider those with other partners alongside the government's response when that's received. So happy to just share it for information and take any comments.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Are there any comments or questions on this? Teresa.
Sorry. Just quickly, thank you, Vincent. It's on the establishment of a Kent and Medway system estate strategy, which I personally think is very long overdue and is germane to ensuring that the things that we want to happen in the ICB actually can physically happen, because it's about identifying all the physical space we've got, about the possibility of co-location, about the way that we might want to develop and where we might want to develop integrated services in the future. So there aren't any timescales on this draft, but that's something that I think needs to be tackled at pace, really. So I wonder if you've got anything to reassure me that it's going to happen quickly, because it's been talked about through the whole lifetime of the CCG and never happened.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. So from my perspective, obviously this is a plan that stretches over a number of years, but to respond to your specific point about estates, the Integrated Care Board is working with partners to develop our strategic estates plan. We are working closely with colleagues in Medway Council as well as in Kent County Council and across the Health and Care Partnerships to develop that plan. So just to reassure you, it is a priority. It does feature in the Integrated Care Board's organisational objectives that we've set. We've just approved at our board in April. And obviously it is one of the significant and important enablers for us to be able to improve on the outcomes for our population, but also to work more closely together as a system to maximise the potential benefits of the resources that we all have as partners. So just to give you that assurance and that work is underway.
Chair, that shows me tremendous commitment, but I think a timeline is important, and if one could be developed, I think that would be ever so helpful.
So, I mean, I'm very happy through another mechanism to come back to you around the timeline for that work, but just to reiterate to you that it is a strategic priority for the ICB. We are focused on it and we are working with partners, and I'd be happy to pick up with my exec colleague outside of the meeting what the specific timelines are for work that we're doing in relation to Medway.
Very good. Any other comments or questions? If not, then Vincent, thank you. And this, as I said, this item was for information. Let's move on to the Kent and Medway Economic Framework, and I'll hand straight over to my colleague David Smith, Kent County Council. David, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. You probably recall that I was invited to come to your meeting last September to describe how we thought the linkage between the economy and the way the economy behaves and social and health outcomes. And it's become quite familiar now, and a lot of evidence that shows that the health outcomes and economic outcomes are closely interrelated, one affecting the other and vice versa. And this is relevant, I hope, to your deliberations, because I think one of your 4 key purposes is to support broader social and economic development, and a number of speakers this afternoon have touched on that. And just to remind you, fewer people who are active in the labour market will cause health problems. So health in Kent and Medway accounts for 23% of all economic inactivity. So just under a quarter. Again, in Kent and Medway, £330 million worth of gross domestic product is lost in annual output through mental health illnesses alone. And lower output correlates with longer-term poor health. What's shocking is that not just in specific parts of Kent, but on average, both economic output and measures of success and health outcomes are getting poorer relative to the past and relative to the rest of the country. So we've got an issue which we hope to address, and in our economic thinking, we have a parallel strategy which I've described in the brief paper that we've put here, and we've come up with some proposals with how we jointly might address this. So we've suggested that there may be some topics which you would mandate us to take away, and we invite you to join in little working groups to come back to perhaps your September meeting with some proposed actions to resolve some of these things. We would have, I know we've talked about this, about how we would measure the outcomes, so we wouldn't do it as a philosophical debate about how, we would address on what should we do. And there's some really interesting examples of what we've been doing over the last 12 months. In Sheppey on Sheerness, there's been a very smart program, small, but it's a model of how to address some of these health and economic issues with a specific area. So we've got an area-based focus as well as a theme-based focus. So I commend the recommendations that we've put to you in the back of the paper, which is to help us think what are the topics, a handful of topics we could address with a very focused discussion amongst colleagues who you might nominate with our economic and our colleagues in the districts and in Medway and with anyone else, because we've got quite a range of academic and research support which we can draw on. So we would provide an evidence-based action plan or mini action plans for you to look at in the autumn. Thank you, Chairman.
No, David, thank you very much. And I think it's worth remembering on this that, as you indicated, the linkage goes both ways. Their health has its enormous impacts on, as you mentioned, areas such as economic inactivity. But also there is what, in the end, health can do as a contributor, more generally, to economic activity within the county. And I think there is the 4th county and Medway, I do apologise, across the wider area. There is, I think, an important element of this also, which is very much in what ways we can support, health actually makes a positive contribution to that economic activity, which is the 4th objective, as I recall it, of the integrated care systems, which is about wider social and economic development. And that is very much what health can do for that, rather than what it does for health, but the two clearly interact. So, any comments or questions on this paper? Jackie.
Speaking from an HCP point of view, I really welcome the idea that we might have some specific kind of guidance about what works, what might be a quick win, evidence that's around of good ideas, things that are really happening. So I think that's an incredibly helpful offer. I also wondered if this is I think, again, I know I sound like a stuck record, but I think we should be careful not to have overlap, and I don't want, you know, the economic group to go away and work up an absolute manual when there are already bits and pieces going on in different areas. One thing that did occur to me, for example, that's beginning to happen is that a couple of trusts are beginning to add social value to their procurement ratings, and it's small things like that that are very doable actually, where we might need to spread the word. And I suppose one of the questions is, you know, whether we talk about, it would be actually an expectation that all our partners might want to subscribe to that kind of manageable, low resource activity that might make a difference economically to the people of Kent by adding social value to all of our procurement. So just sort of throw that in, but I certainly would welcome a list of effective good ideas that the HCPs could really have a look at, as well as the individual trusts.
Yeah, thank you, Jackie, and that fits very absolutely with that fourth objective that we were just mentioning. Sedi, I think you indicated next.
Thank you, and like Jackie, I also welcome the paper, but I would have just seeking assurance that in the discussions that will follow from the production of this paper, that we're also looking at working, for example, with further education in terms of, you know, recently I attended, I think Councillor Murray, you were also there, the Health and Care Conference organised by colleges across Kent and Medway, and the launch of the Academy, for example. There's a pipeline of potential workers with great values to join the health and social care sector that we desperately need. And I'd also like to see reference, if I may, to working much more collaboratively with organisations like KICA. Anne is here from KICA, and there's an awful lot of work going on through KICA, through Kent County Council and Medway around recruitment, attracting different people back to work, different age ranges and so on and so forth. So for me, what I'm looking to hopefully see over time is a much greater collaboration with different parts of our ecosystem who have a contribution to make, but also a lot of benefit to come out of this work. But in terms of a direction of travel, fully support.
Thank you. Thank you, and Shane, you.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Very much endorsing Sedi's point there. The economic levers aren't necessarily owned by one economic framework, and I think that that wider involvement is going to be important. This is also my regular reminder that governance is important, and Kent and Medway leaders like Kent planners, Kent housing, Kent anything can't agree on the colour of the sky because they are not a body. They do not exist other than to bring together a sort of coordinating role. So it's important that with bringing partners on board, they have the ability to contribute, because all these wider partners have their own levers they can bring in, and having, again, just one Kent approach belies the fact that there are different variances across the county that need to be taken into account. So Kent Medway leaders love them all, but they can't jointly own anything. And the Local Government Act will testify to that. So it's about making sure that all of those levers are pulled in the right possible way, and that ownership is jointly owned and shared, but shared in the way that we can use the things we need to do locally, rather than just saying, here's a Kent approach, everybody adopt it, because that doesn't necessarily always work.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who wants to contribute on this item? If not, then he searches... Oh, sorry, Angela.
Being as Shinnis was mentioned, Shane, it is lots of different things which are relevant to different areas, and it isn't a one-size-fits-all. The project in Sheerness on Sheppey is a BBI place-based strategy. It's been a slowly catchy monkey, and we're coming up to the implementation stage. It was not a quick win, but it should reap dividends in terms of a template for how things could work in similar areas in the future. The employers who we have got on board with the project, 5 anchor employers, including the NHS, have been this. You know, it's not a council thing; it's a partnership thing, and they worked previously in Clacton, which is similar, and it could be that this template could work in Thanet, which is similar, but it might not work in Sevenoaks. But what we're all trying is lots of different horses for courses, because that's what it's take. There is no one-size-fit-all to sort out the problems in Kent and Medway. If there was, we'd have done it by now. So we've all got to try lots of different things and have them on the table and have like your menu and say, well, actually, that looks like it might help us in our area. Can we try it? So, but you've got other people, and, you know, Sheerness Sheppey is one, who's going to be the pilot for this particular one. And hope to God it does work, and it will make a real improvement and a real difference to people there, and the economic activity, obviously, but also the education and employment and the pathways. Thanks, Roger.
Thank you, Angela. If there's no one else, can I just move? Firstly, David, thank you for your report, and I don't know if there were any points you wanted to pick up from what was said, briefly.
I very much take the points that have been made about diversity and about practicality, but I would quite like to engage with people you want to nominate. So if people want to send names, or, I mean, it's not my personal project, but it's a collective project, and a lot of you, I want to make sure that you've got a say in the participation, but also identifying the immediate topics. So if you've got further ideas, email them to the Secretariat and we'll pick them up and join up. But we'll reach out.
Thank you very much for that, David. So ICP is recommended to endorse the overall approach to the Kent and Medway Economic Framework, consider how activity to support the delivery of the objectives and ambitions contained within the framework may be aligned with the ICP's health priorities, which I think is something that runs through the paper and through a number of the comments made, and consider the potential for an economy and health action plan to drive forward a limited number of key priorities with a view to establishing a joint working group to report back to the ICP in the autumn, which is the point you mentioned at the start, David. Is that agreed? Thank you very much. Right, we move to our final substantive item, which is the Kent and Medway People Strategy. I'm delighted to welcome Rebecca Brad. And Rebecca, I think it's straight over to you.
Thank you. You've actually just teed me up very nicely, Steady, around our academy, because that is part of this strategy. So I'm sharing today the draft Kent and Medway People Strategy that's been developed by the ICB with support of our NHS Chief People Officers Group, but also with a wide range of partners. The strategy has been developed in response to the shared outcome of making Kent and Medway a great place to work, which is in our integrated care strategy and joint forward plan. And the initial plan that sits under this strategy, as you've seen in the papers, is in that joint forward plan. We've undertaken initial engagement through the integrated care strategy and the joint forward plan, but we've also gone out, particularly on this shared outcome and with this strategy, to a wide range of partners. The strategy sets out 5 strategic priorities: growing our workforce and skills, building our one workforce at place, as John described earlier, looking after our people, using our teams more effectively, and championing inclusive teams. So the strategy is there to build on the good work of our organisations and partnerships. We see this as areas where we can work together whilst not duplicating organisational efforts. It builds on partnership work that we've already got underway, both in terms of our Health and Care Academy, the GP attraction offer, which actually involved a number of partners in this room, and focused on those areas of deprivation mentioned earlier, of Medway, Swale and Thanet, and the integrated teams working in health and care partnerships. So we see that this is a strategy that's, although it's health, it has broadened more broadly into health and care, but we see this delivery being an opportunity to work much more in partnership across the Integrated Care Partnership. So we're asking for engagement and feedback, and also looking whether there's an opportunity to work more closely and more broadly across the partnership and possibly develop a wider people strategy. So it's there for feedback and engagement. Thank you.
Rebecca, thank you very much. Any comments or questions on this? Paul?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. You mentioned the attraction package. I wonder if we could have an update on the outcomes and how successful or otherwise it has been.
So we managed through the first, we were about to go out for our second round of this, but we managed to recruit 3 GPs into Medway, 1 into Thanet, 3 to Medway, 1 to Swell, 3 to Thanet. We also attracted another 10 GPs into our practices more broadly across Kent and Medway.
Very good, thank you. Govinda.
Just a quick point regarding the neighbourhood, integrated neighbourhood teams you're looking to create. Just looking across, obviously, the Chief Constable, and it's a new neighbourhood strategy that's coming out from Kent Police. I just wonder, again, there could be opportunities just to be having some kind of conversations about how we could be all kind of working together and how that could benefit locally rather than duplicating. So maybe it's something we could look at, please.
I'm guessing the answer is yes, Becca.
Oh yes, so sorry. We're already, I know it was just mentioned in the economic development piece, but we're already working with the voluntary sector to look at how we get people back to work as part of our academy programme. And I think there are lots of opportunities for us to do that across the piece.
Okay, thank you. Anne, I think you'd indicated.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to kind of bring to our attention, and it's within the people strategy, but also with the economics, is the social care workforce and growing the social workforce with overseas recruitment. Majority of the overseas candidates that are coming over are coming over to relocate and live here. So for 10,000 social care overseas workers, we're looking at probably 30 or 40,000 people living in our county, and I don't think that we're actually capturing that in our strategy or in the economic plan. And we do need to remember social care workforce as well.
I'm having a few problems with this. Absolutely, and I think there are a number of references in here to the aspiration to build something that is more of a system people strategy, and social care would be absolutely at the starting point of that, in my view. So, John.
Just a quick point, which is more about the delivery of this, because I think it's clear in terms of the ambition, but I think we talked about place being an engine room. To me, the engine room for this is provider collaboration. And actually, we need to, as providers within the places and across the places, get on and design the OD packages, for example, for the integrated neighbourhood teams and working differently. Taking the academy forward is a good example, and I would say that's over to the providers to sort that out in a provider collaboration. So I do think it'd be good to see and just agree who's doing what in order to deliver this, which I know is the next part of the next steps, presumably, Rebecca.
Yep. Richard, yes, sorry.
Oh, I think that works. Is that working? Yeah, thank you. I mean, I guess I welcome the document, Rebecca. We had the conversation at the ICB board, didn't we?
Richard's a bit quiet.
Sorry, we had. I welcome the document, and I think we had a conversation at board about the document. I think there's quite a lot of aspirations in here, and I think that's really good to have those aspirations. But I think we also have to remember that there's sovereign bodies within the ICP partnership, isn't it? And I think there's a number of us, probably in organisations, who've got our workforce strategies and our people strategies, and I think they're unique to the culture of those organisations. So I think, probably building on what you said, John, that in some ways we need to look at the areas where we can collaborate and where those touching points are, because this is quite a congested area. And I think, as Anne said, probably 90% of the care workforce in Kent and Medway is delivered through our commissioned services. And I think it would be wrong for us to impose in some ways a way of working. I think we have to do that in co-production. So I guess it's a really good aspirational document. I think on economic development, making those links across is that, our workforce in Kent, if we put what the NHS, the local authority and Medway put into the care market, it's a huge workforce there that is dependent on care for paying their mortgages, paying their food bills, all of those different things. So it's a massive investment into the people of Kent. So it's a great document, but I think we just have to be aware of not bumping into each other and recognising the differences and the diversity of the different workforce plans and strengths. So thank you.
Thank you. We're just slightly beyond time, but I've got Teresa, I've got Sedi. Anybody else wish to contribute on this? No? In which case, Teresa.
Thank you, Roger. Just quickly, because Govinda, you made an important point there that I think we dropped, that related to the new neighbourhood strategy that the police are introducing. It absolutely forms part of the looking after our people section of the people strategy commitment, and I don't know how you feel about this, but it would be nice either to have a briefing note or even a short paper or a presentation at our next meeting, because I think you're proposing some quite radical changes in that strategy, and taking a place-based approach and a collaborative approach to the problems of health and well-being. The part that the police play in that is really important. So I think being able to understand how you think the new strategy is going to improve things and the extent to which you think that particular determinant will help us achieve some of the things that we've talked about today would be really useful. So I know I've realised I've put you on the spot, but I think Govinda made a really important point.
Chief Constable.
I'm used to being on the spot, that doesn't bother me. Probably wouldn't, the only point I probably wouldn't agree, I don't think it's necessarily a very radical change. I think there is something about reinvestment in resources in geographical areas that is probably very different than we've had for a few years. I don't think it's necessarily very, very radical, but I'm happy to bring any information about it. We've started it today. I think by the time of the next meeting, it'll be long enough to give a view on how it's landed, and particularly the people strategy. The two sort of asks of us in there. The first, it's a very comprehensive strategy, but as the point that Richard made, we'd probably support it in principle, but we probably wouldn't sign up to it because it would conflict with some of our own strategies around people.
Okay, well, I think we'll work out how best to pick that up in relation to a future meeting, whether it's a paper or whatever, but take the point. And Sedi.
Thank you, Roger. I'm very conscious of time. Is there a conversation to be had at a partnership level around how we change the image of social care? Is that a collective responsibility? How do we change the relationship across generations, where ageing is not seen as a negative, and communities' relationships with older people, for example, would draw people to want to work in the sector, to support older people in their community. We have many strategies of different types, different organisations working really, really hard to recruit and retain in the health and social care space. But is there something more fundamental that we need to do effectively to change the image of caring as a profession, as opposed to, I can't get another job, I'll do a bit of social care for 6 months and then I'll do something else? It's probably not for today, but it's just, where do we have that conversation? Is it at a partnership level or elsewhere? Thank you.
Thank you. And that clearly could set us to have a very long discussion from here. Can I suggest that actually we link that into the second of the recommendations, which, assuming that we are in favour of it, I think that is part of that conversation. because we talk here about providing feedback on the current draft people strategy, which has been done, and then consider whether there'll be an appetite amongst members to develop this strategy further to become an integrated care partnership people strategy. I suspect the message I'm getting is that there is an appetite to take elements of this further forward, maybe not quite, but it may be in a slightly more incremental way, focusing on some of the key touch points. And I think what you were raising there is something which I'm sure, looking both to Anne and to Richard, would be you know, an area of very obvious concern and probably worth bringing up within that sort of discussion, I would suggest. Is everyone content with that as a way forward? Good. Thank you. And Rebecca, thank you very much. Right, is there any other business? Nope, there's none, in which case, thank you all very much, and I declare the meeting closed.